101.5 FM proudly presents The Community Kitchen with Annette Long.
Well, you got to keep it simple, and that's that. Well, you got to keep it simple.
And welcome to Community Kitchen. It's hard to imagine that just a couple of weeks ago we were looking out on the good old brown earth, and now we've contemplating whether we can leave our property because we're going to be flooded out or in. It's amazing, isn't it, how quickly our nature can change its course. Today we're going to be talking to Diabetes Queensland. We're talking about the year of Take Your Own Lunch. We try to cover all things on Community Kitchen, but I felt that this was something that we need to look at, and I think there's a lot of people out there suffering from health problems. So we'll be talking to Aloysia Horrigan early in our show, and a little later we're going to be talking to Choice Magazine, because we've talked about labelling. It's a very complex thing when you go shopping nowadays. Once upon a time it was so easy, and as we've mentioned before, a lot of people say if your grandmother doesn't know what it is, don't buy it. And yet it seems to be that there's so much processed food and a lot of things you just can't avoid buying. So we're going to be talking to Choice, because they've been campaigning for so long now to try and get a simple labelling system into our supermarkets. It's better for our children, it's better for us, it's better for the shoppers. And I do feel very, very sad for a lot of people who try to make the right choices, but the labelling is so complex that unless you have some sort of training, it's very hard to decipher. And let's face it, you don't have all day to go through and read every label on the back of every jar, every packet, everything you put into your trolley. So hopefully we'll be able to get some simple ideas from Angela a little bit later. It's beautiful weather out there for growing. I know that we've talked to Peter from the Plant Shack, and I look forward to having him back in the future, because now we have the problem of it's too wet in the garden. Once upon a time when we first spoke to him, we were talking about how we can actually save our gardens. And looking at that rain, I thought coming in today, it's something that we need to do, to start talking to someone to show us what we can do, whether we're mulching too much, not mulching enough. And because nothing's sadder than when you've spent the time digging and planting and then losing half your produce. So we'll follow that up in the next week or so. And as I mentioned to you each week, if there's something that you would like us to follow up on, give us a buzz here on 54951015 and leave a message for Community Kitchen, because we do like to have leads sometimes of things you're interested in. Otherwise, you're just listening to what is my information and my little passion. So it's nice to have some other introductions into our community, whether you're a restaurant, a grower, or a producer. You might be a home cook who has something very special that you'd like to share that your family just love. We'd like to hear that. But what we'll do now is we'll go to a song and we'll be back with our first guest.
You're listening to Our Community Kitchen with Annette Long.
And welcome back. We have our first guest online. Good morning, Aloysia. How are you?
Good morning, Annette.
It's a wonderful campaign, the year of the Take Your Own Lunch.
Indeed it is. You know, we're hoping to inspire people to, you know, just take that little bit of thought, a little bit of planning, and save themselves some money and look after their health at the same time by packing up their own lunch.
Women have been doing it for years, packing the school lunch, and a lot of the times now we've got a lot of women working and fathers working also. Sometimes they don't have the time, or they don't make the time to think about themselves, and yet their children, by law, I guess now most schools have their own lunchbox standards, but the adults seem to miss out on that, don't they?
Well, I think certainly you do hear stories. I work as a dietitian in private practice as well some days of the week, and certainly when people come and they tell me they often are there and they prepare all their children's lunch, just as you say, and don't make one for themselves, and they're often heading out to work as well, and so that it really is important to put yourself there as a priority too.
A lot of the times you talk to different people and they'll say, I don't have time for breakfast, I don't have time to make lunch, yet it doesn't have to be that hard, does it?
Well, it doesn't, and I think it is often about making it a priority. It is about saying it's as important as many other things, you know, so, and sometimes there's a case for, you know, planning ahead a little bit, you know, just the night before, think, well, what am I going to be having for lunch the next day. And with breakfast, it's often also about, if you don't have time to have it before you leave home because you've got to rush out of the door at an early hour to beat the traffic or something, then perhaps, take some breakfast items into work at the beginning of the week, some cereal or some milk or whatever, and have it there so that you can have breakfast when you get into work before you're due to start, and that sometimes works much better for people. And lunch is a bit the same. Lunch is really about, thinking, well, is there something that was healthy I cooked the night before that I could take as a leftover for lunch? Or is there something, if I'm making a chicken and salad sandwich for my child, will I make one for myself as well? And also having a bit of a standby backup, again, non-perishable sort of list, a bit of group of foods sometimes is helpful. So sometimes it's about, if you take some small cans of fish or baked beans into work and some whole grain crackers, they can be in the one or other cupboard at work, and they're a bit of a standby if you've actually missed out and not had time in the morning.
Talking to a lot of the young mums, and they say that they sort of start off the year so positive, they're going to do this and they're going to do that, and yet it seems to be that maybe it gets a little bit boring for them, or they just, running out of time. But I think one of the problems that I hear them speaking about is that buying your lunch is sometimes, if you can't find that right little cafe or little lunch bar, and of course some people are restricted where they can buy, you're sort of faced with a lot of fat and a lot of salt.
And that's true. The choices that are available sometimes are not healthy, and particularly if people work in sort of more industrial areas, often then the food choices aren't great. And I think it's getting to know your local area, and if there's a place nearby that will make a sandwich, but you have to wait longer to get it, so often that's another reason people don't buy those options. They buy something out of the hot box because they can get it immediately. But if you actually, if you're a regular customer to that place, they might be very happy for you to either ring in with an order, earlier in the day, so when you get there you can just pay for it and pick it up, and it could be a healthy option. Or you might give them a little list of what you're going to order each day for the week, and a lot of food outlets are very amenable to that sort of idea, because they know you're going to continue as a regular customer.
I think not only that, it's the cost too, isn't it? Every time you go and buy something, like even to buy a cup of coffee and put a little sandwich in there, if you do that every day, I think you're sort of indicating here in the little printout that you sent to the station that people can save up to $2,500 a year.
That's right. Even if it's just a sandwich and a drink, that can add up to $10 easily, which is $50 for the week if you order that every day, which is, if you were making sandwiches at home, you could make an awful lot of sandwiches for $50. There's nothing wrong with, good old water or a cup of tea or something like that as you drink at lunchtime, and things like sweetened drinks aren't good for us either. So, I think it is really about, just thinking ahead that little bit. And sometimes I suggest to people to maybe make that little plan for the week and say, well, these are our 3 favourite lunches for the week, and pop them on the fridge, and that's what, then, you might decide to do, and make sure you've got the food available that you're planning to use. You might decide, if you're buying your lunch, say, every day of the week, you might decide you'll just buy it once a week. Even that's going to save you a lot of money, and it's also going to be better for your health.
Bring in the tuck shop mentality. We used to have that in our office, I can remember years ago, and everyone would say, well, maybe on Friday we might sort of buy some Thai food, or we might buy this sort of food, or something a little bit different. And that way that you kept the incentive going that you had to take your own lunch all week.
Well, that's right. And I think the other thing is workplaces are a great place to, share some food ideas, that, instead of maybe the, buy in the Thai food or whatever for the week, you could also do a bit of a social thing where everyone brings in a dish for people to share. And, that often, is great for social networking at work, and helps communication between people. And it really also might, especially if you've got people from different cultural backgrounds in your workplace, you'd probably be able to explore some foods you've never tasted before.
Actually, we were just talking about this prior to you speaking with us, and one of the ladies here was saying that her mother and her work colleague, they swap weeks where one supplies the food for 1 week and one the other, because they look after children, so their time is limited. And that way you actually do get to experience different food.
That's right. I think it's a great idea, and I think the other thing too is, don't forget, if you've got children, if they're not very, very young children, they might be able to give you a hand, and they may even enjoy making lunch for mum or dad, So it might be that, you can get some other hands on deck to help you with that process. And sometimes, too, thinking ahead, and you can freeze certain fillings in sandwiches and then just take a bit of salad stuff with you and put that together when you're at work. So there's all sort of little time-saving ideas which really can, free you up and save your money and save your health.
I think one thing that we've talked about here on the show too is like utilising that time in the kitchen. So if you're making one quiche, make two, because you've still got to do the same ingredients. So just double it up, and then you've actually got something in the freezer.
Well, that's always a great idea, is to do a bit of a, cook ahead type of idea and to cook and freeze. And often too, if you think about the energy you're using, if you can put, for example, like your example of, say, 2 quiches in the oven at the same time, then you might be saving on the power bill as well.
A lot of people forget about the beauty of fruit. I think that's an amazing thing. Once upon a time, everybody had their couple of pieces of fruit a day, and I imagine that you would see it in your private practice, that you've got to convince people to actually stop having the wrapped up stuff and have something that is a natural item.
I think certainly people get used to using processed food, but I think there is nothing like, nature's little snack food, which is fruit. And it's, it is about buying fruit that's got good quality, that it's not bruised, because then it tastes best. And sometimes people find fruit a bit messy, which is one of the reasons that people have reported is one of the reasons they don't eat fruit. But, you can chop up some melon or something like, a banana or an apple is not really messy to eat. And grapes are easy, so looking for the convenient things is also a good idea. And I think, fruit certainly adds that nice end to a meal. So if you had a sandwich and some fruit for lunch, it gives you, a bit of a refreshing food to finish the meal with.
Hopefully we can convince some of our listeners to take on the challenge, the year of Take Your Own Lunch.
Well, indeed. And, and I guess if people are looking for some other ideas for lunches, etc., I just might mention that Nutrition Australia has a Healthy Food, Healthy Planet website, and we've got some meal planning, menu planning ideas for the week for families, or if you're couples or singles, and that might give you some ideas for lunch. And also the Swap It campaign has a website which, you can go to, and they also have some recipes and food ideas. So there's lots of ideas around if people are looking for some easy options.
Thank you, and thank you for taking the time to talk to us. I think it's a fantastic campaign.
Thank you, Annette.
Bye now.
Bye.
And that is something to look at. And as Aloysia was saying, have a little look on these websites, because sometimes you just get inspired and you forget about, the same old sandwich. You look at some of these websites and be inspired. 2013, the year of Take Your Own Lunch, and maybe it's something you can do once a week in your workplace, is swap a few ideas. You'll get some fantastic differences with people from different cultures, different ideas, different cooking styles. Sounds fun to me. We might go to our sponsors. Back shortly. And we're back. Just a few little things out of the paper. Been scouring, of course, and one of the articles that I read, which is fantastic, was about eating up our resources. The average Australian eats 4.1 litres of diesel fuel, 29 kilos of soil, and 2.2 tonnes of fresh water in the form of food. That's what it takes to feed the typical human being. And when you multiply it by 7 billion people, our food system is costing a huge amount of resources that are increasingly hard to replace. Science writer Julian Cribb told the Australian Academy of Science this week. So he's the author of The Coming Famine. I look forward to trying to have him on my show. I don't want to sort of create scares about famines, but I think sometimes we have to be realistic of what we're wasting, what we're doing. When you think about the fact that once upon a time clothes were something that you wore a little bit longer, we even have a disposable type of clothes system where you can go in and buy such cheap shirts and whatever. People are going through them. They're consuming clothes as fast as they're consuming takeaways, it seems. So that's something to look forward to. And then another little article I found, which was, I think it's good to have a little bit of a realistic check sometimes, is fast food link to asthma and eczema severity. Itchy or wheezy, it might be time to take a look at how much takeaway you are tucking into. It seems fast food can be a factor in the severity of conditions including asthma and eczema. An international study involving 500,000 children and teens found that three or more servings of fast food a week was linked to an increased risk of severe asthma, eczema, rhinitis, a condition causing a runny nose and watery eyes. The study found that the risk could be as much as 39% higher. Butter, margarine and pasta were also linked with severe asthma in adolescents. The good news? Fruit appeared to have a protective effect against the allergic conditions. And as I said earlier, if your grandma doesn't know what it is, don't eat it, because it seems we're removing ourselves from a lot of different natural foods, and which is going to bring us to our next guest very shortly. We're going to talk about food labelling. I think it's something that we all struggle with. I know I do. We'll go to a song and back shortly. And welcome back to Community Kitchen. We have our guest online, Angela McDowell from Choice. Good morning, Angela.
Hi, Annette. How are you?
Very well, thank you. Choice Magazine's been very busy with better food labelling campaigns.
We have. We've been campaigning for many years on food labelling, and it sort of picked up recently with finally a little bit of interest from our government ministers in the issue.
That's a nice thing.
Yeah.
You were busy yesterday, I heard, following these matters along.
Yeah, we sure were. Yesterday I was down in Hobart with our CEO talking to some senators about a proposal to improve country of origin labelling on food.
That's a really hard one, isn't it? I remember telling someone one day I was so proud that I'd found this asparagus that was Australian and it was canned in Australia or bottled in Australia. And they said, no, go and have another little look on that.
Yeah, because it doesn't actually mean that what's in the can is Australian.
Exactly, and that's deceiving, isn't it?
Well, look, it's really confusing for people, and I think one of the problems at the moment is there are just so many different claims, and that's what kind of makes it hard to know what any of them mean. So Choice is all about simplifying it. So you've only got a couple of different claims, and then we can do a bit of education around that and say, you know, if you really want to buy Australian-grown product, these are the claims you need to look for. And if it's not one of those claims, then it's probably not going to be something that's been grown locally.
There's one particular company in Brisbane, and they have a supermarket, and they actually grade it by whether or not the company is even Australian, and because they've found that people were so confused about food. And as I said before, you know, I'm someone who looks for things like that, and yet it can be so hard to make that right choice.
Absolutely, and I think, I mean, I'm like you, I'm always on the lookout for what's on the label, but a lot of people are in a big rush and they might have a couple of kids with them in the supermarket, and, you know, the more confusing the labelling it is, you know, the more time they're going to have to spend trying to decode it, and really at the end of the day they're not being able to make that quick and informed decision.
I love the old concept of keeping it simple.
Exactly. So at the moment, you know, you see all these claims like made in Australia from local and imported ingredients, and you kind of look at that and think, quite rightly, what does that mean? What does it even tell me? So we'd like to see, you know, really simple and specific labelling. So, you know, you don't have to tell us where every single ingredient is from. You know, that would be quite difficult to do. You might be changing, you know, your suppliers every now and again. But if you've got something that's always Australian, then just name what it is. So if it's a frozen stir-fry mix, for example, just say it uses Australian broccoli. Then you're not misleading people or confusing them by sort of having these vague claims.
Well, I think it was last night I was watching something and they were saying that 72% of our seafood that is frozen is imported.
Yeah, look, my understanding is that there is a lot of imported frozen seafood, and there's certainly also a decent amount of the fresh seafood that's sold is going to be imported. And I mean, Choice doesn't have a view on whether it's right or wrong to, you know, import food, but we think it should be clearly labelled so that people can, you know, decide. Sometimes it might be worth sort of getting a better price on seafood if it's been imported, and that's up to each consumer to decide. You can't do that if the labelling is confusing.
I think also, I mean, getting away from the fact whether it's Australian made or whether it's, wherever, made in another country, I think the actual labelling on the supermarket shelves, I mean, we've got every different organisation. We're just talking to Diabetes Australia prior to yourself, and they're all advocating different things, and there's so many groups who are trying to be so helpful with very bad health issues, and yet mothers, as you were saying, if you're busy, and I must say I feel so sad for them, because if they're busy and they're rushing along and they're trying to pick the right product, regardless of the Australian or whatever it is, but just that fact of the sugar content, the actual ingredient content, and the labelling for that is so complex.
Absolutely, and I think at Choice, you mentioned our Better Food Labelling campaign. We've kind of isolated a few really key issues for consumers, and one of them is origin, and another of them is nutrition information. So it's hard when you turn the pack over and see, all the columns of numbers and the different amounts and long words that you don't really understand what they mean. No one can really assimilate that information quickly. It's really difficult to make an at-a-glance decision using what's currently on the pack. So we'd like to see something a bit simpler when it comes to nutrition labelling, and on the front of the pack, so you can see when you're having a glance at the shelves which is the best option.
A lot of people have always advocated that, when you go shopping, always stick to the outside, because you're going to get sort of more fresh and fresh produce. But there are times when you have to venture into the middle. Absolutely. And I think it's important that I wear glasses when I'm reading. And, if you haven't got your glasses on, and I pretty much use the same products all the time, but if you want to get something else, the writing is so small, and as you say, how do you understand? I mean, we're talking about fat level, for example, and you look at it and you think, well, someone told me once that the one listed at the top was the highest content, whether it be sugar or fat. Maybe there should be something that we have a little set formula that we can actually work it all out, because it really is a difficult thing to do, to go shopping sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. Choice has actually been part of a multi-stakeholder process, it's called, which is basically meaning that there's some health groups, some industry groups, and obviously the consumer group getting together to try and design a system for front-of-pack nutrition labelling, which is talking exactly about the sort of thing you're saying. So having a formula that would weigh up basically the baddies in a product and also some of the goodies, and come out with a score that says, this product is either a 5-star product or a, 2-star product. And, that's never going to replace the detailed information. And we'd like to see some nutrient-specific information in addition to something like a star rating. But I think, for the busiest of shoppers, and, which often happens to be, the mum with a couple of kids, after school, having something as simple as a star rating would be, at least, letting us know when we're in a real hurry which product is the best from the health perspective.
Well, a lot of people talk about different problems they have with, children, whether they've got behavioural problems or whatever, and it must be very hard for a lot of people if they've got no training. Like, I have no training in nutrition apart from what I've picked up from being a parent and cooking all of my life, and yet you try and put that basic life experience, and yet all of a sudden you're faced with the fact that you have a child who's got some terrible reaction to different foods and behavioural problems. It would be very difficult at this present time for people to go shopping with taking that in mind.
Yeah, absolutely. And we do have, improving allergen labelling, for example, on products. And I know that, a lot of parents are looking to things like mobile phone apps for what they call extended label information. But, there are critical things like allergies that, need to be respected on the label. We hear a lot from the industry about limited real estate, and what they mean there is obviously they want to be able to promote and market their products and not have the whole label covered with mandatory information. But allergies is one of those things that's absolutely critical, and I think, the food companies have shown a really good commitment to, improving that information, and, there are a lot of companies that are trying to make it, clearer and more bold so that it does stand out for people who are looking for it.
The traffic light labelling, how effective has that been?
Yeah, look, I mean, it's not something that unfortunately we've seen here in Australia. So the process that Choice is involved in that I mentioned before with the star ratings. That's sort of, intended to be an alternative to a traffic light type scheme. So unfortunately, for many years, Choice has called for traffic light labelling because we think it's, pretty simple and easy to understand, but it's heavily resisted by the food industry. They have any number of complaints, but I think the biggest one is that they just don't want red lights on their products. So the hope is that, through this process that Choice is involved with, and it's been set up by the government, so we're sort of hoping that we'll be able to come up with something that's, as good as traffic light labelling, or at least delivers an improvement on what we currently have.
I personally would love it if you just have big sections that were in the red, that, all that area you walked into, you were entering into a danger zone, and yet you had to have some of those things sometimes.
Yeah.
But there was, you restricted yourself because I think, as I said earlier, keeping it so simple is such an advantage for everybody.
Yeah, and I think, look, if we do come out of this process with a star rating scheme, then that will be something that's pretty simple. Most consumers understand that more stars is better, so it will be, a really good, easy way to understand. And it's also incentives for the companies to say, I want more stars on my product. What can I do to get a better score, to get more stars? So we think that they'll actually, if the system is good enough, it will speed up those product reformulation efforts that are already happening.
It's not a simple process, is it? I mean, there's a lot of people to take into consideration when you make a decision on something like this.
Absolutely, and I think, I can understand the concerns of food companies that they don't want their products looking bad. And, there's a really good argument out there that some products, they're just not the healthiest products. Things like, confectionery, soft drinks, they're not things that, should necessarily be part of your everyday diet. And I think, the problem that I see with that is that we see nutrition claims on a lot of these products. You'll see lollies that claim to be 99% fat-free, and yet the very manufacturers of those products will say, oh, but everybody knows that they're bad for you. And you have to wonder, if everybody knew, then why would they be making these sort of nutrition claims to give the products a healthy halo?
I think we've seen a few things, like our milk issue has been such a confusing one for a lot of people. Our bread issue has been something that is very confusing, and these are everyday staples. Our, butter, margarine issues that we've had over the years. I mean, some people advocate that they would never have butter in their home. Other people say, well, I'd never have margarine. So you start to get a little bit of a family ownership of different products. But I think at the end of the time, once upon a time, life was a lot simpler because there was not as many choices. But now we've got so many choices. I think that sometimes people have to come up to the plate and say, well, I take responsibility for that. And I guess parents have to too.
Yeah, and I think one of the biggest things that people tell me is difficult is that the advice from the people who are supposed to know better constantly changes. So, a couple of decades ago, we were all told not to eat butter, and to eat margarine. And then they started saying, no, margarine has got all these trans fats in them. Now they've taken most of the trans fats out. But there are people saying, actually, no, maybe butter is better after all. So, that's just one example of where the advice changes regularly. And it can be really confusing. But I think at the end of the day, you're right. It is up to people who are concerned about their health to have a look at the ingredients in products. And, we always say, if you're worried, get to know the nutrition information. It's not easy, but once it's a bit of an art, and once you've mastered it, it does become, a little bit easier with those sort of categories like, milk, dairy products, for example, yogurts. A lot of the low-fat yogurts are really high in sugar, so they might have more energy in them than you'd expect. So, for those key categories where it is really confusing, it can help to sort of invest some time in really working out what you want and then having a really good look at the labels. And once you've done it, you can find the product that you like best for your interest, and, you should be pretty safe sticking to that once you've sort of invested that effort.
Once you start to look at the complexities with the labelling and the star system, it's a tricky job, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely, and I think, this process that Choice has been involved in, it's been running for over a year now, which gives you an idea of how hard it is. But, in the absence of, a really effective front-of-pack labelling scheme, it really is up to the individual consumer at the moment to take the time and scour the label. So, I'd really encourage your listeners to, next time they've got an extra 10 minutes to do that at the supermarket, but also, to make sure that they're out there having conversations with people, and, when it gets to the time, we need to be saying to our governments that, we support front of pack labelling, that we want to see change and we want to see an improvement.
I look forward to the STAR system.
Yeah, so do I, and I really hope we get there, Annette.
Best of luck, and thank you for taking the time to talk with us this morning.
You're welcome. Thanks for your time.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
And we've been talking with Angela McDougall, and she is a spokesperson for Choice Mag. Fantastic thing, and really go online and have a look. There's some great articles, just even going into the campaign on Choice magazine. You can see how busy these guys have been. They've been doing some wonderful things for a long time. And as Angela says, take that extra 10 minutes. And if you're watching your fat level, well, maybe just even Google that part of it and find out what you're looking for. If you're looking, trying to avoid sugars or whatever, you could do that. And even if you just picked up one product, even I might have to do that, start reading the labels a little bit, making it easier for yourself. But there's so many things to look at. I know that we've got, now we have the GM food, then we have the palm oil debate, and we have the sugar, and we have the butter, and we have the vegetable oils to olive oils. There's a lot to think about, but I think at the end of the day, one thing we really have to be sure of is that we're looking after our farmers, because at the end of the day, we need Australia to keep producing. Otherwise, we will not be having anything at all produced locally, and that's another thing with our labelling, to ensure that our Australian products are put to the front, because it's very important we follow that. It was nice talking to Angela, but we'll go to a song. We'll be back very shortly. And just following up on the food labelling, another little printout that we had from the Cancer Council, Queensland Cancer Council. They talk about making better informed food choices will be easier for Queenslanders from early 2013 thanks to the new Australian food labelling laws announced last week. Cancer Council Queensland has backed the intergovernmental decision that requires food manufacturers to substantiate health claims on their products. All claims will need scientific evidence to prove the food-health relationship, or they won't be included on labels. While the law takes place from early 2013, food manufacturers have 3 years to meet the new requirements, so it all takes time. And listening to Angela talk before, it's quite complex, isn't it? Because not only do we have our labelling that relate to our health factors and the content factors, we also have the problem then of whether or not that product has come in from another country. And if we're going to be looking at a product that is Australian based, I'll tell you what, there's going to be some reading going on in the supermarkets in the next year or so, because it's taken a long time to even get to this stage, I think, with government talks and everything like that. So it's wise to follow that along. And as we were just saying before, Google it. You can always find out what's going on. That wonderful Google. I think it's just a fantastic thing. But we're almost finished for the day. I'd like to thank my guests who were with me. And, of course, when we are talking about different people that we speak to here, it's so easy to have a look at these different things. So Diabetes Queensland, Aloysia Horrigan, and she's also the spokesperson for Nutrition Australia. Swap your takeaway for take your own. I think it's a wonderful concept. Why don't you think about doing something in your workplace? There's so many good things to do there. And as Aloysia was saying, it's a great way to interact with different cultures, different food styles. How interesting is that? Makes the week a little bit more interesting. And also the good thing about it is, by swapping over your takeaways to your food that you're bringing, you can save up to $2,500 a year. What a great incentive. That's a little holiday when you put it down like that. And if someone said to you, if you take your food to work for one whole year, you get to go and spend 2 weeks somewhere for a holiday, you'd be pretty excited. So $2,500, that is fantastic. And of course, Choice Magazine, Angela McDougall. I've been really following this labelling thing because so many people you talk to, and as I mentioned earlier, a lot of young people are finding it so difficult. They're in a hurry, they've got a couple of children shopping with them, and you can't always take the time to read everything. So once we get to our little system of our 5-star, I think that's going to make it a lot better. So if you do see campaigns like this, don't forget, join up, give your opinion. It always helps to do that. Once again, I invite you, give us a buzz here on 54951015 if you have something interesting that you would like us to put out there to the listeners. I'm sure there's some fantastic cooks in our community. We love to hear that. You might have a special little recipe of a bread you make for your family every day that you would like to share. We love these things. I think that's very important for Community Kitchen to spread the word about eating and enjoying wonderful food. Thanks for joining me this morning, and I'll be back with you next week.